I have the distinct privilege of interviewing a longtime colleague of mine, Maria Quintanilla, and she brings us some incredible insights and history that I'm very excited to have her share with all of you watching this video. So I'm going to just say to Maria, you have so much you could say about yourself, more than I even could say. So I'd love for you to just start out talking a little bit about your education, your agency, the work that you do, your passion in this work. So, just jump right in. And you actually mentioned pre-video that you're coming up on a couple of big dates. So I want to hear more about that too. Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sharon and NCAP, for having me this opportunity. I'm very excited. And what can I say? I guess I want to start off just by saying that I was born into a Mexican family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, so I was born to be a social worker. Both my parents were monolingual Spanish speaking. And my dad is 85 and my mom will be turning 93 in August, God willing.
Wow.
And she still says no speak English. Well, she understands it, but she says que no speak English. So I was destined to be a social worker. I'm so happy to say that it's been over 35 years that I've been a social worker. I'm not very good with math, but you can put me to write whatever you want me to write, and I can write, but I can't do the math. But back in the day when I first started, there weren't that many Latino providers. So not only was I was destined to be a social worker, but I recognized the need and the importance of cultural and linguistical services in the community. I have my master's degree. I went to Berkeley. It's a fairy tale story. This kid whose parents, my dad has a 3rd grade education. My mother has a 6th grade education. They were street vendors in Tijuana. That's where I was born, in Tijuana. My dad would put on his belt and he was selling tamales in one bucket and atole in another bucket. And atole is like a thick drink. It's like think of it as like oatmeal, but it's that. So that's what my dad would sell. And while my mother had me in a basket and she was cutting up the fruits, and that's what they did in Tijuana until they finally came to the United States, where I celebrated my 2nd birthday here. Wow. But although that was the case, I really still consider myself very Mexican. And for me, it's Mexican, it's not Latinx. I know my students that I teach at Cal State Long Beach, it's another generation. And even the generation before me, my friends who are maybe 10 years older, they identify as Chicano. That's also not my word. So I think it's really important for us to kind of just ask the persons that we're working with, how do you define? That's always kind of better because people are going to have different ways of, sort of communicating. In terms of the agency, Latino Family Institute, I'm very proud to say that this organization was the first Latino private adoption and foster care agency in Western United States.
Wow.
And it started back in 1989 is when it started, and it was started by seeds money from the California Department of Social Services, because back then there was nothing. And there's so many systemic and culturally based barriers. It really prevented the outreach into the community for Latino families. And unfortunately, many times Latino families have not been seen as a resource. They've been mostly seen as recipients of services and not as a resource. But I always kind of question people and I let them know, think about the numbers of Latinos and other immigrants that have left their countries, many of them leaving, knowing no one in the next country where they're going to go, and all the things that they have to go through in order to survive. Now, how can it be possible for us to think that people that go through such adversity would not have such resources and strengths to be able to care for children or to do whatever they're going to do, and to succeed? So
what a good point.
Yeah, really, really important. And I mean, it's been such a joy to work and now to see the transformation. I mean, back when I graduated in 89, and you would think, I'm in the #1 public university in the country, right? That there would be lots of students of color. Well, believe it or not, in my class, there were only 9 Latinos, 9 of us that graduated. That was it. There was no more.
Wow.
So definitely, I see how that has changed throughout the years. And now at Cal State Long Beach, where I've been teaching for the past 9 years, the vast majority, I want to say probably 60% of the MSW students are Latino. And
Wow.
I can't believe it. It's like, wow. And when I tell them that I only had 9 in my whole class, they can't believe it either. But I think it's really important to understand that with Latinos, we are such a diverse community, and maybe I'll talk more about that after, but I just want to kind of follow the questions that you were asking. And in terms of the work that we do, we actively are recruiting families interested in adopting or fostering. And for many, many years, we also did a lot of work, hundreds of adoptions with relative caretakers. We did a lot of over 600 adoptions that we did. And that was through a special program that we had, and we were funded by the California Department of Social Services that gave us extra support, extra funding. So we're very proud of that work, and we're located here in Southern California. We're located in Los Angeles County, but we also serve surrounding counties, and we did most of the work with LA County, Orange County, and San Bernardino County with the relative caretakers. And just a wonderful opportunity to do that. And a lot of the things that we've been able to do has been because of the support of both county funding, doing Department of Mental Health support groups for prospective adoptive parents and foster parents, and training other adoption and other foster care agencies through that prevention and early intervention services grant that we received many years ago. As I've mentioned, the state Kinship program that we had, as well as being so lucky to have several federally funded programs. One of them that we were very proud of was the Abandoned Infant Assistance Program that we had in Santa Ana many years ago, working with Latino women impacted by HIV, AIDS, and substance use, and they were either pregnant or had children 6 and under. So we did over 300 families that we served in that program. It was at the time the only program working exclusively with women impacted by HIV/AIDS. And our goal was to get them to make sure that they went to the doctor so they could take their medication, so that when the baby was born, the baby would be HIV free. That was our main goal, and really supporting these women and children and families. Another federal grant that we had for 9 consecutive years, and I think Latino Family made a big impact in Puerto Rico. We had the Infant Adoption Awareness Training Program. We were one of 8 or 9 national organizations that received funding, and we were just so honored to work in Puerto Rico, working with our community, our Latin American community. I loved it. This Mexican person here became an honorary Puerto Riqueña. I loved it. I had, it was just awesome. And to be able to work, this was through helping medical providers, DCFS, and any other service providers working with women with an unplanned pregnancy to really think about their options for their pregnancy, whether they were going to plan to keep their child or whether they wanted to plan something different. And we went all over the island. We trained over, 6,000 people. Wow. If you look on the website, you'll find our actual numbers. And it was really groundbreaking because a lot of the stigma and a lot of, kind of like not the negativity of not supporting, of stereotyping women who chose not to parent for many circumstances, and really kind of helping them. And we came up with this sort of like a interview kind of guide for medical social workers in Puerto Rico. And they were able to institute this more neutral kind of interview, instead of being kind of very judgmental and, not really understanding the different dynamics and the complexity that it takes for a woman to make that decision, or a family to make that decision.
So it sounds to me, I'm interrupting you, but it
Yeah.
sounds to me like you've had to do an awful lot of writing in Spanish. I know that one of the things we struggle with in this country is not having enough information in Spanish for our, Spanish speaking or first language Spanish speaking individuals. And it sounds like you've had to do an awful lot of that work.
Well, luckily during the time of that grant, there was money for that, and everyone pitched in on how to get it done. But that was just a wonderful experience. And, and then most recently, the grant that we had and ended now was working with the unaccompanied minors program. So we were able to serve quite a bit of children. It was a very complex grant, especially because we got it right at the beginning of COVID in February of 2020. And that really took away like half of the grant period with no fault of our own. Right. And that really impacted the program. But we had the opportunity to work with over 100 children from all over the country, from all over the world. Primarily Latin America, but we got one little girl from Romania, one little girl from Haiti. And we got kids from Mexico, Central, South, and the Caribbean. And that was a wonderful experience, and just getting to know these kids and the journeys that they took. And I just can't imagine my parents, their journey as adults, much less can I imagine the journey of children, minor children. So we've been involved in many different things, and I'm really proud of what we've done.
You have a lot to be proud of. I guess I would go back and ask a couple questions in regard to that. You mentioned you were the first agency of your sort on the West Coast. Were there other agencies on the East Coast or in the central part of the country?
You know what? That they were Latino run, Latino focused? No.
There was. So you were the only one in the United States when you started.
Probably. And the thing, I know that Ernesto Loperena, who's a dear mentor of mine, was running a COAC in New York. But if we're talking about the definition of Latino run, Latino focused, and because of the intention of the state of California and wanting it to be really focused on engaging the Latino community that had not really been engaged, and getting them to become a resource for the children that were in need of adoptive or foster homes.
And has that changed, Maria?
Yes. Thank goodness, yes. And there are many more now Latino run, Latino focused adoption agencies, adoption foster care agencies that are only doing foster care. Yes, there's several now. So I'm very happy about that. So that makes my impending retirement easier, as well as seeing all the students that are coming through and joining our field. It makes me feel so wonderful.
The other question that you raised for me, and it's always been a passion for me, a passionate concern, and that is you get grants, you create incredible programs, you meet the needs of very vulnerable populations, and then the money stops. Exactly. So what happens then to those programs and those populations?
It's so unfortunate. And I think that what we need to do is, it's sort of the same thing like when you hire staff with a grant. Mm-hmm. And when you hire them, they sign a note or a letter that says that based on your job performance and based on continued funding, you will have a job, right? Mm-hmm. So we're always trying to be proactive and thinking, okay, what can we do to support our families? And obviously what we want is to help engage them and link them really to other services that are going to be there once we're not there. But as you know, if it's a specialized program, there might not be that same type of service. So it's always a challenging aspect of the work that we do. And then if not something formal like that, it could be tying them in with other organizations that and affiliations that they feel trusting, like their faith-based community or cultural groups or community groups, things like that. Or in like with our Latino families, a lot of times, many people don't know, but the US, the consulates, like the Mexican consulate, El Salvadoreño consulate, all these different consulates also have their own informal and formal networks and community organizations that we can then hook them up. And at least they feel, okay, I can trust this. It's my embassy. So why wouldn't I trust my embassy? Right. So it's just kind of making those connections, but it's always a struggle. It really is.
Yeah, it's really been a long-term issue for me, is that there's a lot of money that goes into grants and excellence projects, but not in those grants is a statement of what will you do when the money ends? How will you continue to serve this community? Mm-hmm. And that, you know, I'm so proud of all the things that you've shared. And then that leaves me wondering, what about all the people that you served who are no longer able to take access to those funds? So this hasn't come up in any of our other interviews. So I love being able to just kind of discuss that with you. You mentioned that you've got 2 big anniversaries coming up. What's happening?
Well, I guess it's I'm thinking it's 3 milestones, and I'll start with in order of when they're coming. I'll be turning 60 next month, which I can't believe. So that's a, you know, I was 24 when I got my, or 23 when I got my bachelor's in social work. So it's been a while that I've been a social worker, and I love it. I love it. And I always say I am a social worker. I don't say I work as a social worker, because one day I had this argument with my brother, who's a teacher, and he's like, I'm Jaime. I work as a teacher. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm Maria, and I am a social worker, and your big sister, you know? Yeah. So it's the way I identify. It's who I am.
Yes.
So definitely that. And then in August, I'll be celebrating 30 years with my license. I can't believe it. As a licensed clinical social worker, it'll be 30 years in August.
Well, congratulations. Wow.
Yes. And then towards the end of the year in December, my husband and I will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
So I'm really excited. I mean, I was only 20, you know, my sons are in their early 30s, and they tell us that we're nuts, that we're crazy. How could I get married at 20? You know, and I tell them, you know, we're from another generation, you know, another generation, another level of acculturation. You guys are more, you know, Americanized than I am. And I know it's different now. And plus it's times have changed. So I'm really excited about those milestones. Yeah, who would know that I'm going to be 60? Good grief.
Well, I'm so grateful you're reaching that milestone.
Yes, yes.
In terms of adoption and permanency, has it touched your family personally at all?
Well, you know what? Not formally, but as I always, whenever I travel, and I've trained all over, and I've trained in more than half of the states in this country around, for all these years that I've been going from one place to another, is the thing with our families, Latino families, as well as many other communities, that there may not have been a formal adoption through the legal process, but there's been many informal adoptions, right? People come and stay with you, and they're raised with you. And so that's always been part of our family, and where I was growing up, I grew up in the 70s in South Central, which the demographics back in the day were very different. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, in the 70s, when the majority of the people that lived there were 99.9% African American. There were very few Latinos, and of the Latinos that were there were only Mexican. They were Mexican descent. There were only 5 families in my neighborhood that were Latino, and of the 5 families, we were the only ones that were permanent, had legal status, because eventually my parents became legal residents through their work, because they both worked in factories. And all the remaining 4 families were not documented. We were the only ones that went to Catholic school. So even back then, despite knowing where I was growing up, I mean, I didn't know really a lot, but I knew that, everyone struggled, but we were kind of privileged even back then, and I recognized it. So that's always been really something important to me to recognize. And again, wanting to help, always wanting to help. And my parents were always, if somebody needed a ride, if somebody needed a gallon of milk or whatever, my parents were always there to support and to help. And my mother, if you ask my mom what I do, she really can't tell you what kind of work I do. And even if you got asked her when she was 60, she probably wouldn't be able to explain. All she would say is, I know she helps people. But one of the things that's really grounded me is my mom's, her ability to be very humble and to tell me that it doesn't matter, how much money you make. It doesn't matter how many initials are behind your name. What's important is how you treat people, and you treat people with respect. And it's not about demanding respect. It's about leading by example. And that I think I've really done, but it sometimes I think it's easier now, although I still have issues, being assertive. I still struggle with that, but I know it comes from a lot of stuff. As much therapy as you get, you still struggle. Right? But you continue working on, and it's just to be comfortable. And I have to remember, like I tell my students, if it's hard for you to advocate for yourself, think about what you're doing and how that's going to impact your clients and your community. So if you think of it that way, then that'll give you the strength and the confidence to be able to then say what you need to say.
Brilliant. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, you're talking about retirement. I don't think social workers ever retire.
Oh.
I'm 81. I'm still at it. So, but I think we're caretakers for a very long time. But I do wonder, when you do retire and people are standing up at some wonderful tribute to you, what kinds of things do you want people to remember about you and your work? If it was going to be a eulogy, what do you want people to say about you?
I think definitely that, and here I struggle with being humble, but also wanting to give myself credit, right? Because that's the other part too that I struggle with, is that really that I have been a pioneer. Yes. I've got to own it. And I shouldn't feel bad about it. I shouldn't be embarrassed. I shouldn't think I'm gloating, but that is the reality, at least out here in California, but also the opportunities that we were able to open up the doors for many other organizations to support them, and to really understand that the Latino community has really come a long way, because for many, many years, we were considered the sleeping giant. And yes, we weren't sleeping. We were a giant. We were just invisible. Yes. We were not asked to come to the table. And we realized, wait a minute, if we don't get up and go and knock on that door, we're not going to be seen or acknowledged. And that's what we've had to do. And really to be out there and to be acknowledged, and also recognizing the diversity that we also talked about, the diversity of the Latino community. If you look at it, there's 21 Latin American countries, 21, and we're including Brazil because it's Latin American. And we also include Spain, even though it's European, but that's the mothership, whether we like it or not, or however you want to put it, but that's the reality. So we're talking about Europe, the Caribbean, South America, Central America, and Mexico. What diversity, right? Wow. So there are many things that we share in common, the values we have on family, celebrations, our faith, child-centered, our matriarchal, patriarchal, but everyone has a different twist. And that's not just Latinos, that's everyone. Right. And it reminds me, many years ago when I was asked to speak at a national training for the recruiters for the Adopt Us Kids program many, many years ago in Baltimore. And I was talking about the different Latino values. And I said, look, this is the Latino twist, but I know that many of you share the same values. It's just whether you're from the South or whatever. And then I talked about one of the most important things, especially in customer service, is how we treat our families. And I've done many trainings on customer service as well, but with the Latino twist of the high value placed on personalismo. Personalismo is a high value placed on personal connections. And I started explaining what I meant by that. And, mainstream, which I always say mainstream instead of saying white, or I don't want to offend anybody. So I say mainstream organizations, it's like, let's get down to business. There's no time to waste. Well, if you don't take the time to say, oh, how beautiful your flowers, or wow, I love your little goldfish, or whatever it is, you've got to have that personal connection first. And if they offer you a coffee and you don't drink coffee, don't tell them you don't drink it. Just say, oh, thank you. And just grab your mug and put the sugar, add the half and half, and shake it around. And every now and then pick it up and do the same thing. I go, you are letting her know that you are accepting, even if you don't drink it. But don't start, oh, no, I'm gluten-free and blah, blah, blah. No, you're going to cut the personalismo. So I'm sharing all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then this lady in the back, she raises her hand with a Southern accent and she says, now I get it. I says, what do you mean? She says, now I understand why whenever there's a Spanish speaking, even though I don't really speak Spanish, I really don't, they send them to me. Because what you're talking about, that personalismo, that's Southern hospitality. That's what you're talking about. That's Southern hospitality. I said, exactly. See what I mean? It's just with the Latino twist. So those are the things that, really I've done. And I think that I've trained all over. Okay, what are the cultural and systemic barriers? We can't blame everything on the system. No, there's also cultural barriers. And one example I can think, Sharon, and no surprise to you, is the issue of shame, infertility. Infertility is a big one. And that, depending on your family, depending on your worldview, your beliefs, that may be a cultural barrier that keeps you from calling an adoption agency, for even thinking about calling an adoption agency. So really, doing a lot of training on what are possible barriers. Let's identify them. How can we address them so that we can psychoeducate, help our families, and then have access? Because I'll tell you one thing about me, my kids are 31 and 32, been married almost 40 years. It wasn't like I was planning I could have had a kid already who would be 39 or something, right? It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I struggled many years with fertility. Many years. Didn't get pregnant until one miscarriage. And then with my son, I had to get on fertility treatment. And that's how I got pregnant. And they said it was a miracle, blah, blah, blah. And they said, if you want to try again, there's no guarantees. And 13 months later, guess what? My other son was born. So I think there was a reason. And culturally, I believe that, that there was a reason. And that experience has made a significant impact in my life. And so when I've been working in adoptions and families come and they talk about, their sadness, and they, you hear the shame, and you hear, well, I wonder if it's because God wanted it this way, or all the different cultural beliefs that people have. I can really feel it. I'm not saying that those who haven't experienced that don't empathize, absolutely. But for me, it's like an added gift, a painful gift. Because I tell my sisters, who I have 3 sisters, I was the only one in the family that had issues. And I tell them, I don't care how old my kids are, but you will never understand that grief. I go, because I can get emotional just thinking about it again. But you guys don't understand, and that's okay. But let me tell you, that has really helped and shaped my worldview.
Now, things keep changing. You've mentioned them frequently. Things keep changing. And certainly we're all witnesses to what's going on, at the border, all of our difficulties around immigration in this country. And certainly not everybody coming to the border is coming from Spanish-speaking countries. But I think for most of us, we think that's the bulk of the folks who are fleeing from disaster and violence and death and poverty and lack of food and all of that. And I'm wondering, as you look at what's going on in this country, what do you want people to know about the Latino experience and the perspective that you would hope they would carry as we look at this unfolding?
Yeah, a very complex, issue, right? Because on the one hand, wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone could be taken care of? And that's ideally should be, and I believe that it could, but priorities are different. And really making those countries accountable for their communities, for their people. And again, I say that knowing that my parents both came, undocumented. My husband came undocumented over 40 years ago as a 24-year-old escaping war in El Salvador, right? So I get it. I get it. And I have many relatives who sooner or later they became residents. And I have some that are newers that don't have it. So it's really hard, right? But wouldn't it be ideal that the government really took responsibility so we wouldn't have these issues and all the war and all? But I again want to go back to what I originally had said. These families, the majority of the families do not want to leave their country. My husband said, I never in a million years thought of leaving El Salvador. I was happy in El Salvador, but the rumblings began, and I witnessed one of the first major massacres in San Salvador back in 79 when it was just starting. He's like, I'm going to be next. And I can't be next because I'm the one that heads this family, the oldest male in his family. He goes, what's going to happen to my mom and my siblings if something happens to me? I need to leave. I need to support my family. And that's why he left. And he's like, and he never wanted to leave. So the majority of our families, who in their right mind wants to leave? Everything that they have, their family, everything. No, nobody wants to leave, but they're desperate. But I want you to think about what it's taken, the courage of these people to leave, and for us to see them again, not as recipients of services. Yes, they'll need it for quite a while, absolutely, right? Because financially, everyone needs help at the beginning, but to recognize their strength, their resilience, their ability to entrepreneur, to survive, and that they want to do the best they can. And unfortunately, that's not the narrative. It's a negative narrative. But I also understand people's frustration. I also understand that we're thinking, wait a minute, we can't even take care of our own. How can we take care of all these other people? There's no easy answers. But I think that the best part is to recognize that these people are in, like you said, Sharon, they're in a desperate situation, but they're good people overall. And that if we give them that opportunity, they're looking to better themselves for their families and for the people that they've left behind. And again, it's sort of like the work that we've done. I mean, throughout the years, things have changed, but we still have lots of barriers. I remember back in the day when we would tell social workers in different counties, we've got this wonderful family that, is willing to take a SIP set of 3, blah, blah, blah. And they would ask me, well, where do they live? And these were families that lived in my neighborhood where I grew up. And I remember social workers telling me, I don't drive past the 105 freeway. That's an area that I don't drive. And that was my area. That's where I grew up.
Yes.
And again, the stereotype, but really understanding that we need to look beyond and really be accountable for our biases. And that, I think, is, at least now we talk more about that than before. We didn't really talk about these kinds of things in the past. So hopefully people are really be more reflective.
You've touched on so many important lessons. So as we move towards the end of the interview, assuming that some incredible student, undergraduate or graduate, is watching this, or families are watching it, you've touched on the importance of connections. You've touched on the importance of seeing people as resources and not being so concerned about where they live, but more what they have to offer. You've talked about all of that. What other things should the folks observing this video be aware of that is intrinsic in the Latin culture, so that whether they're adopting children from another culture, whether they're serving people from another culture, what would be some important lessons that you would like them to have? Because you've touched on a few, and I know you have a million more.
Well, again, just recognizing the diversity, it's really important. And as I mentioned, there's a lot, we come from many different places, the level of acculturation in terms of how long people have lived in this country versus those that are recent immigrants. that dynamic. Now we think more. Back in the day, we used to say you were either assimilated or acculturated, right? But now we know that there's a spectrum. There's a huge spectrum in terms of that. So really, we need to assess where families are. And you might just be, just ask the families, this is the first time I'm working with a family from Peru. And I know that that's South America, but let's pretend that I were visiting Peru for the very first time, and you're going to be my tour guide. Give me some pointers on Peru and let me know, especially because I'm a foodie, I'm going to really want to know about your specialty dishes. So give me a little rundown if you can do that for me. And that would give your client the opportunity to talk about their country. And of course, we understand that what they tell us is not going to be 100% all Peruvian. It is 100% all Peruvian by their worldview, that person you're talking to, but they're giving you that glimpse. And I think that's really important because we're so diverse. It's so important to recognize that. And again, understanding the culturally based barriers and the systemic barriers are always going to be present. But if you're able to engage in that personalismo, that personal connection, once you've done that, you've established that trust. You've established a positive relationship, and they will work with you. I think that's really important. The other thing that I think that's really important, and I think we're getting more away from it than prior, where when we talk about culturally based services, we really mean personalizing it to the family, to that family, because in the past, it's been a literal translation, and a literal translation doesn't work because wasn't made thinking or taking into account the diverse populations that we're now working with, whether Latino or non-Latino. It can be African families as well, or any family all over, depending on how long they've been here. So those are the things that are really important. I also think that with parents who have adopted Latinos or are thinking about it, there's such a wealth of resources out there, community, faith-based, the embassies. Take advantage of the embassies, call the embassies. They'd be more than happy to provide all kinds of cultural information that can be shared with your child that you've adopted or are planning to adopt. There's many opportunities there, but I think really, to me, what's most important is that we take like a humble approach to our families. And we may be the ones with the initials behind our name, but they are the experts of their families. They are the experts of their worldview, and understanding how their worldview is impacted, and also understanding that when I talk about culture, I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity. Culture is more than that. Culture is the traditions. Culture is your geography. Culture is what generation you were born in. Culture is what significant life events have you had that have colored your worldview. Like in my case, growing up in South Central, being the oldest, being Catholic, going through infertility, fertility. All of those things have shaped who I am. And we as practitioners and as students need to understand that. And I would say, if there was one last thought that I could have, is what I tell my students, and I've been telling them since day one: remember that as social workers, as therapists, we are the instruments of our work. Like my husband, he's been a cabinet maker, journeyman cabinet maker all these years. And as a responsible journeyman, he takes his tools every now and then to get them professionally cleaned and sharpened and all of that. We have to do the same. We have to be in therapy. We need to be reflective on our process. We need to support each other. We are only as good as we allow ourselves to be. And if we don't recognize that we also need to be taken and get sharpened and cleaned every now and then, or more often than that, then we are doing a disservice. We are the instruments of our work. And what we bring to the table is all of these things I've kind of sort of talked about: our cultural lens, our significant life events, and we need to be in check. So, and also recognizing, and I tell my students, I know that when we're first starting off, we just want to help our families get to where they need to go. And we want to tell them, but we got to recognize the importance of dosaging. We can't just give it all to them. It's sort of like if you've got this earache, and to top it off, I've got a double earache. and I go to the doctor and my ears are killing me and the doctor gives me the medication, I want to take the whole darn thing because I'm dying. But I got to remember, if I do that, I'm going to really die. I'm going to OD. So I got to take one pill 3 times a day, dosaging. So that's what we have to do, especially in the work that we do that can be so sensitive, can be so triggering. And we also have to recognize, and I'm so proud of the most recent work that I've done, that I've contributed, author to the Child Welfare League of America compendium for adoption in that chapter. And one of the things that I wrote in the chapter is that it's really essential to recognize the range of factors affecting adoption practice, and that the child welfare process of adoption is often viewed as a noble cause, and the narrative is celebratory. Providing permanency for children is essential, but it's crucial to recognize that the practice of adoption is rooted in loss, and that balancing these two valid but opposing narratives is critical in order to provide adoption competent services. Man, when I wrote that, I was crying because I'm a crybaby. I'm very sentimental and I still cry. And I tell my students, don't worry about your tears. And I know that other people from different modalities may disagree with me, but hey, it's worked for me. And I tell them, so long as you continue in your role as the provider and not that you completely dysregulate, that now they're going to have to take care of you, then that would be crossing the line, right? So and we also got to remember that the layers of loss impact all members of the adoption constellation, and that will alter their life trajectory, and not just theirs, but all the future children that are coming. So an adoptive parent may be mourning the loss of their imagined child. The kinship adoptive parent will continue to mourn the loss of not seeing their son raise her grandchildren, right? And for the people who are adopted, they've lost the most, right? They've lost their first family. They've lost siblings that were with them, probably siblings, the future siblings, the future relatives, and all the connections, all the cultural connections and all of that, as well as for those international adoptees, losing their countries of origin. And that we need to recognize all this and at the same time honor adoption. We most definitely need to take care of ourselves, right? In order for us to be able to be present, we are the instruments of work. The load is heavy. We have to be accountable and take care of ourselves. I mean, that is what got me through all these years. And my husband never wanted me to be a social worker. I met him when I was 16, right? And he didn't want, because he says, you're too emotional. You're going to go crazy, more crazy. And I told him, and Sharon, you might have heard me say this before, but I told him one day, don't worry about me crying. Worry about the day I stop. Because the day I stop crying, that means my heart has turned to stone. And at that point, I'm no good for no one. And when I said that to him, I'm crying again, telling him that. And he's like, "Ay, why do you always have a good comeback?"
What a perfect way to end our interview. I have to tell you that I would love to sit in your classroom and continue to learn from you. You're a delightful teacher. I thank you so much for this interview. People are going to benefit a great deal from your wisdom. So thank you so much, Maria.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for being one of my early mentors. I so much appreciate it. I mean, we're talking 25 years ago or more. Yeah. And I thank you. And I'm so lucky to be part of your community. Thank you.
Thank you.